Hello, I'm an old fart, and I have a guilty pleasure. I like knives. I have been leading you on a tour through some of the knives in my collection of small folding pocket knives, but we're not going to do that today. Today we'll take a little detour, and I want to come back and show you again this knife. This is a Spyderco Tenacious, but we're not going to talk about the knife this time. We're just going to use it as a test piece, a guinea pig, to go through the process I use for sharpening knives, because as I mentioned in the review of this knife, this is amazingly dull. So let's follow along while I give this knife a basic sharpening, just so you can see how I do that. I'm not claiming it's the only or the best way. In fact, I'm probably doing a lot of things wrong, but it's what I do and it satisfies me. So here we go. So aside from the mechanics, which I think we've got fixed up now, that's opening smoothly and locking nicely and closing smoothly. The other issue with this knife is it's dull, but I mean dull. My God, I don't think I have ever experienced a knife that was so dull. This is duller than the current season of Grey's Anatomy. I mean, it's that dull. Let me show you what I mean. A standard easy way to check the sharpness of a knife, here's a sharp knife, is lightly scrape it sideways against your thumbnail. Right? Now, don't press down. You don't want to cut through your thumbnail. Just lightly scrape it across the thumbnail. And the sharper the knife is, the more resistance you will feel. And you can hear it too. Let me put it near the microphone here. Microphone. Here, still trying to get the microphone. There we are. Now that's zero pressure. I don't want to cut myself. But if I go to something which is not sharp, like the backside, you get smooth like steel on glass. So there's a first basic test of whether a blade is sharp. So this one, I may as well be doing the back of the blade. I mean, there is just nothing there. This thing is so dull, I'm actually comfortable touching the live surface of the blade. There's just nothing there. Final test. Here, let me. We'll get a piece of paper. We're not even going to do the suspended, unsupported paper thing. We'll just take a piece of paper, do there's a sharpness test. Let me take this one. Nothing. I could sort of tear the paper if I work on it. Oh my God, it's dull. So let's fix that. We'll put it in the KME guided sharpening system and sharpen it up. And I can see, looking at it, I don't know that it's ever been sharpened. I don't see any signs of abrasion on it. So I think it's been used, probably hard, and probably never been sharpened, which is arguably better than having been sharpened badly. So anyway, we'll get it set up in the KME and we'll see what we can do. So let's see if we can get this thing sharp. I have mounted the knife in the jaws of my KME sharpening system here. And quick little tour if you haven't seen one of these before. The idea of the KME is called a guided system. So the knife is held in these jaws. And sharpening stone is in a jig here with a long rod on it. The rod will pass through this bushing so that as I'm sharpening, it's holding it at a constant angle. And even when I change to other stones, because they have a variety of grits, the stones are all exactly the same thickness, so it will hold the angle constant, which means I'm not wasting any energy or metal by changing my sharpening angle as I go along. So that's a good thing. Now, since it's going to hold a constant angle for me, the question is what angle is appropriate? And sometimes there's a reason to want to change the sharpening angle of the blade. We call that reprofiling. But in most cases, I just want to discover the existing angle and use that. I just want to make the knife sharper. I don't want to change the geometry of the blade. So let's do that. First thing, the knife is clamped in the jaws here. Now there's a bunch of different approaches to this and strangely some controversy, but what seems to be the accepted practice and what works well for me, because the blade changes its shape as it goes along, so what's the best angle to clamp the knife so that it's getting equal treatment of angles all the way along. And what I find works best is to put the blade in such a way that a straight line from heel to tip is parallel to the end of the jaws. Now, this isn't quite that, but it's close. So that's the angle I'm going to be using there. Now, to figure out what angle is on the blade right now, isn't that neat? It's so dull I can safely do that. And the easy way to do that is called the Sharpie trick. So I'm going to take a Sharpie and I'm going to color the sharpened bevel of the blade. And just to give that a chance to dry, I'm going to flip it over and do the other side while I'm at it, so that that also has a chance to dry. So, coloring the bevel of the blade. Okay, back to this side, where we presume it has dried by now. And I'm going to take a fine sharpening stone and run it along the ink. Here, I've actually set this to the right angle. Let me change that. Whoops, there we are. So, wrong angle. I'm going to run the stone just a few passes with a fine stone along the inked part of the blade. And then I'll have a look at what I've done. Now, I don't know how well you can see that. Not very. Oh, can I get a magnifier in there? Will that work? Sure, there we are. You can see that I have removed ink from the top of the bevel, but not from the bottom. So that means that the angle is too flat. So I'll just raise the angle a little bit. Sorry for bumping the camera there. I'm not used to having to reach in and out under this boom arm. So I've raised the angle a little bit, like so. So it'll cut a little farther down into the bevel of the blade. We'll see how that works. Do a few passes. I've taken some more ink off, but not all of it yet. Raise a little more. Again. This is a surprisingly steep sharpening angle. And my guess for an explanation is that because this is a inexpensive knife, and it's in particular it's a budget steel, not a super strong steel, so they're probably deliberately doing a fairly steep sharpening angle. There we are. Just to give the blade a little bit more resilience and toughness. So I have, with that angle, I have taken the ink off all the way down to the edge. So that's probably the correct sharpening angle. Now let me flick around and just do the other side too. And because it's very common on inexpensive knives that the angle is not the same on both sides. And sure enough, on this knife, the angle on this side is actually even steeper still. Almost looks like it's never been sharpened on this side. But I'm going to leave it as it is. As I did that testing, I see I was rapidly wearing away some of the knife. I'm approaching the edge. So part of what was happening, I think, is I was taking away the burr that formed from testing on the other edge. So I'm going to call this good enough. Now, just out of curiosity, let's find out what the angle is. A lot of Spyderco knives come from the factory at 20 degrees. So I'm going to take this angle measuring block here, zero it on the base of the sharpening jig, and I'll just put the stone in there, put the angle measure on the top of it. 25 degrees. Wow, that is a steep sharpening angle. Honestly, if I expected to use this knife very much, I would probably shallow it out and come down to 20. I'm going to take it down to 20 degrees. 25, that's just crazy. That's I don't need a knife that is that sharp. So I am going to be reprofiling the blade by bringing it down to around 20 degrees, but I'll just check that. Okay, 21 degrees, close enough. So I'm not going to be matching the factory bevel, despite my little lecture about how good it is to do that. But when I said I'd like to match the factory bevel, I was imagining that the factory bevel was something sensible, like around 20. 25 is a lot closer to being a crowbar or a hatchet than what I would think is a good angle for a knife. So I'm taking the liberty of deciding that I'm going to reprofile the blade. With these diamond stones, it'll only take slight, and this relatively inexpensive soft steel, it'll only take slightly more time. Okay, now just before we start the actual sharpening, there's one other little job I want to do. I've noticed just through experience, now it won't matter much on this knife, but I've noticed through experience that sharpening, of course, as I'm sharpening, I'll be building up swedge. The debris of the sharpening mixed in oil builds up along the edge of the blade, and I'll wipe it off. But what I've noticed is it actually scratches the blade quite noticeably. And if I'm not careful sharpening a knife, I'll end up with a beautiful mirror finished blade, and then just up from the edge of the bevel, about 4 or 5 millimeters of area on the flat of the blade, which is badly scratched. And I think it looks ugly, and it looks careless. Now, as I say, on this blade, you probably wouldn't notice it because the grind marks are so visible on this blade. But in any case, my habit is that before I sharpen a blade, I'm going to protect the flat. The easy way to do that, I found, I farted around for a while. I'm going to put some tape on it. I farted around for a while trying to pre-cut tape to fit the curve of the blade and then get it on in exactly the right place and so on. And then I kind of fell into a trick that is a lot easier, which is this. I'm going to take a piece of ordinary Scotch tape. I'm going to put it on the blade here, close to the edge, but covering the edge. There we are. Press it down firmly, particularly close to the edge, because that's the whole point, is to protect that area. So I'm just using my fingernail to press it down firmly. Now I'm going to use another sharp knife and trim it. I'll go trimming it. So that has trimmed it to the shape of the, here, I'll take the end off there too. That has trimmed it to the shape of the blade, which is good. It's a good start. But right now it is covering the bevel of the blade. So now I'm going to hold my knife at an angle approximating the angle of the bevel and just run it along again. And what I'll do, and you'll see here, is I'm lifting a tiny sliver of tape. And basically what I'm doing is clearing it off the bevel. So now I have tape precisely up to the edge of the flat, but not covering the bevel. So that will give me nice protection as I'm sharpening. Now I'll flip it over and do the same on the other side. So a nice long piece of tape. Try to get it down flat to avoid those air pockets. There we are. Press it hard flat with my fingernail. By the way, I cleaned the blade with a spritzer of alcohol before we did this, because there was still some oil and grease left on it from my cleaning procedure, and then of course the tape wouldn't stick. So let's do a fast trim. Fast trim. Get rid of that. Is there anything more frustrating than trying to flick tape off your fingernail? God, it's all over me now. How annoying. Okay, and with an angle on the blade, trim it off the bevel. There. And there. So now tape is protecting the flat. Probably more protection than it deserves, considering the quality of the grind. Bevel is exposed for my sharpening. So we're ready to actually start sharpening. If you buy one of the standard kind of beginner sets from KME. It comes with several sharpening stones, I think from 140 grit up to 600, or there's a 1500. I don't remember if it's part of the beginner's kit or extra. But if you're going to do any repair or reprofiling of blades, as I'm about to do here, it's worth having the coarser stones as well. They're extra cost. So this is a 50 grit stone. It says The Beast, and it really is coarse. Leaves a hell of a mess on the blade, but removes steel quickly. So 50 grit. We're going to start with that. That'll get us the basic shape of the blade. And we will, I see the tape lifting a little bit there, so I'm just going to put it down. We lubricate with, this is just regular mineral oil, a fair amount of it on the 50 grit stone. And again, there's controversy about which direction to move for sharpening and everything. What works fine for me is a scrubbing action, so back and forth. And I'll go back and forth, sort of trying to be even as I go along. And I usually do 10 passes and then stop and check my work. So let's do that. I recognize this is going to be a terrible sound for you to listen to, and I will cut this after 1 or 2 passes so you don't have to listen to them all. There's one. Two. Now I'm going to stop to save your ears in a second, but I will point something out. You look at what's happening here. Start here, work this way. Start here, work this way. Think about it. The center of the blade is getting twice as much sharpening as the ends. So for that reason, I stay a little longer on the ends. So I might count, say, 5 strokes here, and then start moving at a speed that is giving each area 2 strokes, and then I'll slow down and do about another 5 on the end. So we'll do one more pass like that. This is pass 3. And 4. Now I'm going to keep going for a total of 10, but I'll cut the recording here and spare your ears. See you back here in a minute. 5. So I've finished my first pass of 10. The first thing I'll point out, you can now see here on the edge of the blade, the leftover grit and steel from the sharpening process sitting there on the flat of the blade. Now I'll gently wipe that off. But that's what would be scratching the hell out of the flat of the blade if I hadn't put that tape on it. Now, I've been reprofiling the blade. How am I going to do this? Here. The blade angle was, say, there, and I've been reprofiling it. The blade angle was there. I've been reprofiling it shallower. So that means I'm taking steel off the top of the bevel, and as we progress, that beveled area will be moving down the blade, and when I've done all I need to, it will reach the tip and overlap the tip. But until I've gone far enough, there's actually going to be 2 bevels there. The old one, which will start at the tip and come up part of the way, and the new one, which will start at the top and go down part of the way. So have I gone far enough? Well, the way to tell is take a fingernail and pull up on the bottom of the blade over the edge. And if I've gone far enough, I will feel a burr. I'll feel a definite stop as my fingernail tries to move over the edge. Because once the sharpening stone reaches the edge of the blade, it will roll a small amount of steel under the edge, leaving a burr, which you can feel. And I'm not feeling it, so I know I have not gone far enough. Probably another set of 10 will do the job. But I'm not going to do the other set of 10 on this side right now. I want to keep the blade symmetric as much as possible. I'm going to flip it over. and do the first set of 10 on this side. I'll renew my oil. And I'll do another set of 10 passes on this side of the blade. Okay, I've finished 10 passes on the second side of the knife. Again, take the debris off the blade, check for a burr. I don't expect to find one, and I'm not finding one, so both sides need more sharpening. So, flip back over to the first side, and I will repeat another 10 passes on this side, and then I'll check again for a burr. Freshen up the oil. Here we go. Okay, I did a couple more passes there that I didn't bother filming, and I've ended up about 40 passes on each side, and as you can see, I'm actually on the second side now. That was about 10 minutes of work, and what I have is the burr I'm looking for. I can feel with my fingernail at the edge of the blade a distinct metal burr that stops my fingernail from sliding over the edge. The same was true on the other side before I sharpened this side, but of course sharpening this side removed the burr from the other side. So anyway, I have the burr that I'm looking for, both sides. So that means that the edge is now the shape I want. It's beveled to the angle I want, and it's beveled all the way to the edge. So now we're just going to use progressively finer and finer grained stones to refine the edge down to very sharp. Before I do that, I'm just going to clean this stone. Before I do that, I'm going to see if I can work out how to get this blade. I don't want to take it out of the mount, but I'm going to see if I can work out how to get it into a microscope here, just to see if we can see the burr, or at least see what the edge looks like. So give me a second to set that up. So here we are looking at a microscope view of the edge of the blade. Now you can ignore the fibers that you see sticking out. That's just the bits of my rag from wiping the slurry off the blade. I have to work out my geometry here. So those fibers you can ignore. What we can see, though, is you can see, there's a good view, you can see, it's really hard to figure out my directions on this thing. There we are. You can see the burr that has been formed, this lip of metal along here. There's a good view of it. This lip of metal along here, which is folded back from the action of the abrasive along the blade. I'll just see if I can improve that focus a little bit. There we are. So you can just see the burr here, this little lip of metal, and that runs along the entire length of the blade. And if I flip the knife over to the other side, get it back in the view here, you can see there's no burr on this side because it's been abraded away by sharpening on the other side. So, however, as you can also see, the edge is in really rough shape here. This incredibly coarse stone, 50 particles per inch grit, has really done a number on the edge of the blade. It's extremely irregular. So what we've achieved is shaping the bevel to the angle that we want, but the edge of the blade now needs a lot of refinement. We'd like that to be much smoother. Not necessarily mirror smooth like a razor. You might want a little bit of toothiness left, but less toothy than this. So the subsequent finer and finer stones that we use are not going to change this bevel angle anymore. They're just going to refine that edge. So the last thing we're going to do before we change sharpening stuff, so this is the last side I sharpened. That means I've rolled the burr under. And the burr is down there and I can feel it. I'd like to remove that to make it a little easier on the next phase. So I'll just flip over to this side and just do a single pass with the stone. No pressure, just letting the weight of the stone be enough force, and confirming that I have removed the burr. Yes, I have. Not from the very end there, so maybe just a touch more on the very end. So I've removed the burr. I didn't do that long enough to create one on the other side, so we're now ready to go to the next grit of stone. So now we're just going to go through a sequence of grits of finer and finer levels until we have the edge beautiful and smooth. So moving up to 100 grit, which is still very coarse. This is another of the optional stones that does not come with the beginner set. It's still considered extremely coarse, used for reprofile and not everyday sharpening. Again, I'll oil the stone a bit. And I'm not going to make you watch the sharpening exercise. It is slightly more interesting than watching paint dry, but not much. See you back here in about 10 strokes on each side. Okay, I skipped ahead here. I've finished 10 passes on each side of the blade. You can see we're on the second side here now. I'll just clean that sludge off the blade and confirm. I already done the other side. I do have a burr there. This was at 100 grit, good burr along the entire length of the blade. So I will quickly remove the burr with this same stone. Burr is gone, and we're ready to switch to a finer stone. So moving up in grit or finer stones, this is a 140 now. This is the coarsest stone that comes with the basic starter kit from KME. And this is plenty coarse enough if all you're doing is sharpening a very dull blade. You really don't need those coarser stones unless you're reprofiling a blade to a different shape and want it, whoops, that's upside down, and want it to go quickly. But this stone is perfectly coarse enough for most use. So I can recommend the beginner's set from KME is more than enough to get you started. So anyway, here we are, 140 grit stone. Don't need as much oil now because the stone isn't as porous. Any kind of oil will do. I like to use this clear mineral oil because it's clean and odorless. So, okay, 140. I'll do 10 passes on each side. You notice how much less noise it's making as we get into the finer grits, by the way. Okay, I have done both sides at 140 grit, and I have a nice burr there, so I know I've come right to the edge with this grit. Flick the knife over, do a quick pass to remove the burr. And that'll be it for the 140. Okay, next we are going to do a 300 grit. So let's Still calls it coarse. Interesting. Same routine. I'll do 10 passes on each side. It's worth mentioning, as I get into the finer and finer stones, first of all, you need less oil because it sits on the surface of the stone. It isn't falling into the gaps between the particles. Also, it gets harder to feel the burr that is being formed because the burr is smaller. It's basically the size of the grit. So I find I can still use the burr as a test of whether I've gone far enough, down to about 600 grit, and after that it becomes really questionable whether I'm feeling it or not. So anyway, here we go at 300. So here I am just finishing up the second side. I've done 10 passes on each side. And I know from the first side, yes, there is a burr there, so we've done well. It's getting smaller, harder to feel. I'll just flip the knife over, do a quick pass here to remove the burr. So we've done the 300 grit. Now I'll just mention that this is sharp now. This is certainly way sharper than it was. It's sharp enough to use for some purposes. Here's a piece of paper. It's sharp enough to cut paper, although not beautifully slicey yet. It's getting sharp. We'll keep going. I'm going to get a 600 stone. See you in a sec. So we're going to switch to a 600 grit stone, which KME calls fine. It is now certainly starting to feel quite smooth. Just a drop of oil is enough now. Spreads smoothly on the surface, doesn't sink in. Okay, I have finished up the 600, both sides, and I do indeed have a tiny burr. At 600 the burr is getting hard to feel, but it's there. Flip back to the first side to get ready for the next stone, and quickly light pass just to take that burr off. Now at 600, this may be sharp enough for some uses. It's quite sharp, as we'll see here. I'll just keep it in this, but take this piece of paper. I'm limited by what I can do with it in the clamp, of course, but that is quite sharp. And I'm going to stick it in the microscope, actually. And what we'll see is that it's still a little bit toothy along the edge, which is not a bad thing for a worker knife that is really going to be primarily used to cut things, as opposed to just a collectible that, frankly, is what my knives are. 600 is a good grit to stop at. Let's have a look at it under the microscope. Here we are. So this is the 600 grit blade under the microscope, and you can see again there's still some fibers stuck to it, and you can see the tape is getting scratched up there. But check the edge of the blade. Remember how gouged it was before. Here's a quick peek. This is the 50 grit. See how gouged the edge of the blade is. Now it's quite smooth. We'd have to go into a much higher magnification than I can do on this low power microscope to see that there is still a bit of a toothy jagginess at the edge of the blade, but it's down to, 600 teeth per inch as opposed to the 50 from before. Let's see if I can get the magnification up a little higher here. There we are. You can just see the bit of toothiness still available in the edge, which is why 600 is considered actually a pretty good working sharpness for many types of blades. Now, a razor is sharper than that, but are we trying to make a razor? Well, for me, actually, yes, I intend to go much sharper than this just because it's fun and I enjoy sharpening. But anyway, under the microscope, as you can see, we have basically looked after the edge damage, the jaggedness that was done as part of the 50 grit reprofiling. We're down to a reasonably smooth and fine edge. We'll come back and have a look at it again after a few more grits. So we're ready to do the last diamond stone in the set here. This is 1500 grit, which is really fine. Not the last step we're going to do, but the last stone. Again, we're down to the point where quite small amounts of oil is good enough. Same routine. I'm going to do 10 passes on each side, and then I'll meet you back here. Finishes the 1500 stone. Barely detectable burr, which I will remove. So this is now sharpened to 1500 grit. So this is very sharp. The edge is not a mirror yet, but it's certainly polished, and it is plenty sharp. Just get a piece of paper here. Now, there we are. It is sharp, plenty sharp. This is the finest stone that comes with the basic KME kit, and you absolutely can stop here. I'm not going to. I'm going to keep going just for the fun of it and take the edge all the way to a mirror polish. And we'll need a quick talk about how to do that. So we need to keep going to finer abrasives. Now that's as fine as the diamond stones that are available stock from KME go. You can get finer stones from other manufacturers. So here's one example. You can move to these Arkansas sharpening stones, the black and then the translucent. These are much finer. Now there's no official grit rating with these, but they're rated as being something like 2000, 2500 or something in that ballpark. Anyway, in my experience, they do produce a very nice mirror edge that is still has a little bit of a luster to it. So these are very nice stones to work with. A dab of oil. I'm not going to use these here, though, and the reason is, I shouldn't have put that other stone away. The reason is that they're not the same thickness. Here we are, you can see. They are not the same thickness as the, not easier to see? Not the same thickness as the diamond stones. Which means if I put this stone in and use it, because the stone is thicker, I have raised the angle of the sharpening jig, which means I will no longer be reaching the tip of the blade. I'll be, from here, I've changed the angle to this. So I would need to readjust the angle to stay on, which would mean either a calculation, which is not difficult to do, or redoing the Sharpie test. So I tend not to use these sort of in the main sequence of sharpening a knife, but I do use them for touching up the edge on an already sharp knife. If I'm bringing a knife in from the wild, to just polish the edge a bit, well, I already have to do the Sharpie test to set the angle, so I may as well do it with these. They do produce a very nice edge. So what I'm going to use instead is a series of these. These are, again, from KME. These are optional. So this is a sheet of glass that is exactly the same thickness as the diamond sharpening stones, so that issue with changing the angle doesn't apply. And then, you probably can't even see it here, on the glass, or maybe you can see the edge there, there's a peel and stick film that's available from 3M that has abrasives in it, and they're different grades. They run from, now they don't measure grit at this point, they run from 9 microns, which is about 1800 grit, I think, all the way down to 0.1 micron, which is about 200,000 grit. So I have each one of those films mounted on its own piece of glass. So I'll run through these. So this is what I'm going to do now. I'll start with the 9 micron. And I'm not going to make you watch all of them. We'll do one just to point out a couple of things. And then I'll run through the rest of the set and show you the results. So again, this film works with oil. Now, very little oil at this point because this is very fine abrasive and it's sitting on glass. So the oil is not going to soak into anything. So tiny dot of oil. And the next thing that happens that's different is we're no longer going to use a scrubbing action. So I'm not going to go back and forth with the stone because this is basically razor sharp now. This is a thin film of vinyl. If I push this against the sharp blade, it'll just shave it off. I know that because I've done it. So at this point with these films, we're going to work only in this direction. Down, lift, and so on. And we will do that for 10 passes. Even now, just on this first pass, you can see the black sludge building up here. That's the ultra fine waste being taken off the stone. And even after just a couple of passes here, this is the second, you should be able to see the edge starting to take on a mirror there. Yeah, you can. You can see that the edge is already taking on a mirror reflective finish. Now that's only going to get cleaner and brighter as we go into finer stones. This was the 4th pass. I'll finish this, 10 on each side, and then meet you back here in a second. The scraping sound you hear, by the way, is the rod in the bushing. It is not the film on the knife. That's almost silent. And that is 10 on both sides. Just clean that off. And although I can't feel the burr anymore, I know in a theoretical sense it must be there. So I'll just quickly remove it. There we are. And that. Now, can you see this is already becoming mirror-like? I can't find an angle that shows that off. I can't see myself yet, but it's quite reflective, sort of like a polished chrome at this point. I'm going to go up through the other grits that I have here. The complete set looks like this. Here's the table that comes from KME. So we just did this first one, the 9 micron grit. And I'm going to do all of these. So 6, 3, 1, 0.5, and 0.1. And the approximate grits you can see going up here. So somewhere around here, sort of 3 micron to 1 micron is the equivalent to the green honing compound that you can get for strops, which is why when we're done, we're not going to strop the blade on honing compound. We'd actually be making it duller if we did that. Anyway, I'll go all the way up to here to the 0.1 micron. I won't make you watch that, and then we'll stop and have a look at the final product. So I'll see you back here in a while. So that is the end of all of the grits. I'll just do a quick deburr on this side. So we've gone all the way down to 0.1 micron grit on both sides. And I think you can see there, we've achieved a very nice mirrored surface. Now, of course, the tape is still in the way here, so I'll try to get that off. Being careful around that live edge now, because I couldn't cut myself on it before if I tried, but I certainly can now. I haven't got all the tape off. That'll take a little bit of picking. I'll do that off camera, maybe. Let me get the major parts of it off first. Actually, that's going to be kind of boring, watching me pick tape off a knife blade. I'll stop and I'll come back here when I'm done. Okay, we're back. I've got the tape off of both sides. I'm not sure why the tape fragmented like that. I've never had that happen before. So something different about the adhesion on this steel or something. So anyway, I do have tape gum on the blade. And there'll also be a noticeable mark under the clamp there. So I'm going to work on cleaning that off now. This is pure isopropyl alcohol. Just a little spritz of that on. Should be good to remove most of that stray adhesive. Now, I'm being very cautious, remembering that that is an extremely sharp edge that I'm working around now. That got most of the gunk off that side. Spritz on this side. And now I'm going to take it out of the clamp and clean the rest of the blade. So same thing, a little spritz. Now that I've got access to the whole blade, spritz of isopropyl alcohol, thoroughly clean the adhesive off. And the final thing that I will do is a little spritz of the frog lube solvent. Again, it's primarily a cleaner, but it has a tiny amount of lubricant and corrosion reducer in it. And that's what I'd like to have sitting in the blade as we're done. Now, can we see the edge there? You can see, just give it something to reflect. See in the edge there, a very nice mirror now. I've struggled with names for the different levels of sharp. I mean, this isn't razor sharp. It was razor sharp when we finished with the 1500 grit stone. And it became mirror sharp about halfway through the various films that I was using. It's much sharper than that now. I tried using the term bragging sharp for a while for a blade that has reached this level of sharpness, but I don't like that word very much because honestly, it's not really anything to brag about, and I typically don't. So I think I've settled on a term for this sharp, which is this. This is stupid sharp. Stupid because that was really a waste of time. There is just no sensible reason to bring a blade to this level of sharpness other than for fun. So anyway, so here we are, stupid sharp. Piece of paper. There we are. So that is pretty damn sharp. And I am going to finish off because this is not a high-end steel and it can corrode. I am going to finish off with a little spritz of frog lube corrosion control, which is a oily, waxy film that will adhere to the metal and inhibit corrosion. So just put way too much on let it sit for a minute so that it can interact with the surface molecules of the metal, and then I'll wipe it off. And that's leaving a thin film of that waxy protection. So there we have taken the blade from so dull that I was very comfortable handling the live edge to so sharp that I'm having to take extra care around it. Sharper than it needs to be, and sharp enough that I'm not ashamed of it. Okay, back to the rest of the review.